Betting, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Bet with the Best podcast. Its mission is to explore better ways to bet on races, to seek out new, successful players, and to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. Welcome to episode 9 of the Bet with the Best podcast. This week's guest is quite different from our recent guests in that he is a computer model-based player that has been playing professionally for only about 2 years. So this is a chance to gain some insight from an early career modern pro player. Should be a great opportunity to learn, not only for those of you that are interested in betting models, but also for everyone else who should be interested in learning more about your main competition today, which is computer players and how they approach the game. I'm happy to introduce Dennis Montoro to the show. Hello, Dennis.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for agreeing to talk. It's hard for me to get the computer players I know on the show. It's like they don't want to share anything. Don't want to let anybody know the secret ingredients. But hopefully, I don't expect you to tell us everything. But I think hopefully by the end of the show, the players that aren't familiar with the way you approach the game will learn a little bit more about how somebody who's kind of computer based goes after things. So let's get going. And I usually like to start the show with the players telling what I call their origin story, kind of how they got started in the game, and then how they evolved to where they are today. In your case, a pro player that's computer based. So why don't you give us your origin story?
Sure. I grew up on Long Island and frequented Belmont as a child. I have some fond memories of overlooking the paddock with my grandmother, checking out Jerry Bailey. And that was kind of my first introduction to horse racing. And my family was always, or at least my father was involved with gambling to some degree, mostly sports betting. And he kind of introduced some gambling concepts to me as a child. And I would say as a teenager, I kind of became obsessed with gambling games and understanding the mathematics behind it and how to create advantages. And I kind of followed through with that as an adult. I've been exposed to just different types of gambling. Uh, Mainly as a kid, or as a young adult, I was involved with poker and some blackjack, card counting type stuff, and gravitated more towards sports betting. And probably in my mid 20s, at that point, I was educated a little bit with statistics and mathematics. It's not what I majored in, but I was kind of exposed to it. And I started to apply some concepts I've learned there into sports betting at first. All the while I was kind of a horse racing fan a little bit across the years, but was mainly focused on building models in sports betting. And eventually, like I said, I was involved with poker a little bit and playing a lot of tournaments. I discovered horse racing tournaments, I think through the NHC and some of the other websites out there that were putting on tournaments. And that's really when I started taking horse racing seriously. I think I'm kind of unique in that way, in that I was driven into taking horse racing a little bit more seriously through tournaments rather than cash betting. And um, started playing some tournaments on horse tourneys and the NHC and whatnot. And eventually in 2018, I played my first live tournament at Del Mar and ended up winning. And that was a complete shock to me. It was very early on in my model building career. Um, but after that, I was kind of exposed to more cash betting opportunities. I was introduced to rebates. and started to kind of figure out like, oh wow, with rebate, the game might be more beatable than people think. And that's kind of when I started, um, taking my modeling even more serious than I was. I actually temporarily dropped sports betting. Um, and not to go on a tangent, but at the time when I was betting sports, I was getting limited in a lot of sports books, and this is back, in like 2018, like I'm saying, and to bet to bet on sports. And meanwhile, horse racing was like, yeah, we'll pay you to bet more. So it was kind of a no-brainer to drop sports and go into horse racing, and obviously takeouts higher, but rebate offsets a little bit. But the main perk for me was to not be hassled about where I can bet, accounts getting closed, getting paid and whatnot. So it was a dream for me to start betting on horses. So after I won that tournament in Del Mar, I gave it a shot there and promptly didn't do well. Didn't do well at all. My models weren't good enough. I had a lot to learn about power mutual markets, and there were 2 years of losing when it came to cash betting. Tournaments I was doing well in. I had a couple other bigger scores. I think I cashed in the Breeders' Cup twice. But things started to turn around for me with horse racing in 2020 during COVID. Um, I think a lot of people had more time to kind of focus on uh, maybe their side hustles or other hobbies and whatnot. And that's kind of what happened with me. It kind of fast tracked me a little bit. I kind of said I'm somewhat educated with building models, but a lot of it's just been self taught. I don't. I have a degree in finance and a master's in finance, but I don't have any sort of academic training in data science or machine learning. But I kind of obsess over it and teach myself. So things, like I said, were turning around for me in 2020 and really early 2021 before I, officially went full time in this. Um, Things started to click. And, ever since then, it's been a grind, but it's my main source of income at this point, and I wouldn't have it any other way right now.
Well, that's really interesting. There's a lot there to unpack and kind of dive into. But I'll start with one interesting thing you said. And I think this is kind of cool. And I think a lot of people don't realize it is that if you're a big successful player in horse racing, you kind of get everything, the best of everything. You'll get the rebate, so you get better pricing, and the ADWs and the tracks, they love you because you're driving up the handle, and they're not trying to beat you. They're just trying to get you to bet as much as you can. That's how they make their money. But in the sports world where you were initially more focused in your play, it's sort of the exact opposite. The people who they treat the worst in the sports betting world are the players who want to bet a lot and that are successful. In fact, they won't let you play if they can. They try to figure out who you are, and they make it as hard as possible for you to get a bet down. Is that a fair summary of what you experienced?
I think it's pretty fair. Don't get me wrong, there are some what's known as sharp sports books out there that welcome your action and transparent with their pricing and limits and whatnot. But yeah, I think that's generally fair to say that if you are beating a sports book, they don't want your action. And horse racing, they don't really care about your success. I mean, they want to churn as much as they can, sort of. But uh, generally, what you said is fair. Yes.
Okay, so that sort of got you in when you found out you could get discount pricing as long as you kept your volume up, and they in fact liked you to bet a lot, then rather than the opposite, that sort of enticed you to focus more on the racing side than the the sports betting side. And then another thing that you said was interesting to me was you said that you weren't having a lot of success. Your models weren't good enough, but you learned some lessons and you got to the point now where your models are much better. So can you kind of describe what, without being really highly technical, how your models have gotten better, and without giving away everything you don't want to give away, what is it that got better? What did you learn that enabled you to go from not being so successful to now where you're grinding out a profit?
Yeah, without getting too technical, um, as I've alluded, it was sort of a journey for me to get better at some model building techniques. And so all throughout those years, and mostly over COVID, I kind of discovered some technical things that I was probably doing incorrectly or could have been doing better. But also, I think the biggest improvement for my models was having a better understanding of parimutuel markets. And what I mean by that was understanding what the market tells you. And um, I kind of say to myself all the time, the best publicly available model out there is the tote board and all of the data uh, in each pool across the tote board. And the same concept applies to most markets or sports betting. It's an easier concept to understand because typically, if you start talking about a sharp sports book, their closing line will incorporate all of the sharpest action, in the whole entire world in that given market. And if you start applying some error testing, um, with those closing lines against actual results, you'll quickly learn that those are the probably the most accurate publicly available model out there. And of course, it's a big thing to say publicly available because the sharpest bettors obviously don't release their models. So um, the same thing applies with horse racing, where the final odds are usually going to be a pretty good indicator of what the appropriate price of a horse should be. Is it absolutely 100% efficient? No, no, of course not. If it was, there wouldn't be any way to make any money in this game. So, that was a um, big hurdle for me to overcome and really truly understand. And parimutuel concepts make it even more complex in that you really don't know. Well, you kind of have. I mean, at this point in the game, you should really have an understanding of where your horse's price is going to end up, depending on what pool you're in. But you really should have an understanding there, and I know we'll probably get into that a little bit later with the CAWs. But understanding where your price should be is an important, almost necessary concept to really employ these days. But yeah, the understanding the parimutuel markets. There's been a ton of papers written about it, academic papers, but understanding the favorite long shot bias. I wrote a tweet, I don't know, maybe a year ago now about this, the favorite long shot bias, and I felt like nobody read it, which is fine by me. But to me, it's important that this bias still exists in most parimutuel horse racing markets, but most notably North America, where generally shorter price horses are going to return more for your dollar, and longer price horses is the opposite. Mostly meaning that shorter price horses are underbet and long shots are overbet. And I think a lot of people know this, but they don't really know how to apply it in their day to day handicapping, betting, whatever you want to call it. But to me, it's one of the most important concepts out there. And um, as I said before, knowing what price a horse should be is important, but then also seeing what everyone else thinks about it is also important. Meaning, if you think a horse should be 3 to 1 and he's 6 to 1 loading into the gate and maybe even drifts up to 7 to 1 when they're down the stretch, and you think he should be 3 to 1, that's, to me, that's not really an overlay. Like, something's not right there. I think you made a miscalculation of that horse being 3 to 1. Now, vice versa, if that 3 to 1 horse is 3 to 2, okay, like, yeah, I'm going to still incorporate that's technically an underlay, but I'm still going to, update my model probabilities to account for that and see what that thinks. But you know, I know a 3 to 2 horse is going to return a lot more for my dollar compared to a 7 to 1 horse. Now, of course, that doesn't mean a 7 to 1 horse, is always going to be a losing proposition. But the point is that when you collectively look at um, races across North America, and look what a 40 to 1 shot horse returns, and a 10 to 1, and a 3 to 5. You'll see higher returns for those shorter price horses, and I think that's important to understand when you're doing this every day. And of course, just a disclaimer: that's just the win pool, so one of the many pools.
So let's talk a little bit about that because what you described, I think, is a bit complex. So I want to kind of make sure the listeners understand what you're saying. You have a model that says what it thinks the fair odds are for a horse, and you're saying another model out there is what the parimutuel pools are telling you, or what the overall public opinion is. That model is probably a really good model as well. And so rather than ignore that and just use your model and just assume, that you not try to take into account that information, you look at that, and when there's a difference between what you think the price should be and what the public it says the price should be, you don't just assume that you're right. You factor that into your opinion. Now, I'm guessing that doesn't mean that you decide that your opinion is wrong completely, because if you did that, then you'd never make a bet. If every time the price was higher than you thought it should be, and you was meant that you couldn't make a bet, then you would never find any value. But I'm guessing that you adjust what you think the fair odds are somewhat, taking into account the public, so that you don't assume that you had as big an overlay as it appears. Is that kind of what you're getting at, or am I misunderstanding what you're saying?
You said that way better than I did. Yes, I made that probably a little too complex, but yes, in that, of course, my models are taking into account what the public's doing and where I think they should be. But ultimately, at the end of the day, um, there's an expected value sort of calculation, which basically says, here's my expected probability. Here's what the tote board's telling me of what my potential payoff's going to be, where I think it's going to be after the last flash as well, and ultimately just coming up with um, a potential what my expected value is for every dollar that I bet.
So, and that's really interesting. And I have some experience with models, and anytime my model was wildly different than the betting public, especially if it thinks this horse is much better than the betting public, I was always really nervous. I kind of felt like I'm missing something. I'm probably not. The public's usually not that far off. That's kind of what you're saying, right?
Yeah, maybe I should take a step back and kind of just explain what a model is. But yes, I mean,
No, do actually, that I should have we should have started with that. So, kind of for the layperson, kind of
yeah.
explain what a model is, sort of what are the inputs, what are the outputs, how do you use it to make wagering decisions? Kind of as simple as you can. Maybe walk them through that, because we should, you know, host fail there. We probably should have started with that.
The simplest way to explain what a model is it's taking any information that you have, and that's going to be your input, So with horse racing, it could be equibase data, time form, or any other data that you may have. And it's inputting it into a mathematical slash statistical process that will convert that information into an output. And that output could be many, many, many different things. You could be predicting running times. You could predicting finishing position. You could be predicting lengths beaten. Um, yeah, I said finishing position. Just the probability in general of a horse winning, of a horse finishing in the top three. And then there's other um, more complex models that where you can simulate a horse race and kind of come up with final percentages of a horse finishing in each finishing position itself, and that could be useful for obviously some more exotic wagers. And I think that's kind of the simplest way to describe a model. It gets very, very complex very quickly for I think the average layperson, like you said. But it's not extremely complex where the average person can't figure it out either. So, I think I get a lot of questions about building models on Twitter from time to time, and there's plenty of data science courses out there that will teach you. Now, I wouldn't expect to take a 6-month course and be able to beat a bunch of markets or anything like that. But there's a lot of free information out there that I kind of started with many years ago, and it just became, like I said, an obsession to work with over time.
So great. That's really helpful, I'm sure, to the listeners. So again, you can be as vague as you want in some of your responses, but in terms of what the key inputs to your model are, they like past performance data? Is it something else? I mean, what are the main inputs into the models that you use?
It depends what you're predicting, right? So if I was trying to figure out, like you're saying, what fair odds should be, where I think the market might close. I might use more public facing data, meaning data that's found commonly in the past performances, publicly available data, etc. But if I'm actually trying to figure out what I think the actual probability is, well, I might, or I'm definitely going to use some data that I know is proprietary to myself, or a different way to manipulate some of the public data out there, but doing stuff that certainly isn't already baked into the line and into the price, I should say. And I know you've been vocal about it, and other sharp people have as well. Just that if data is publicly available, it's probably already factored into the price, and that's again another important concept to understand. Because while let's just take buyer speed figures, and I'm not bashing them at all. While at face value they might help predict winners, they won't help you make money by betting off of them because of they're already factored into the price. In fact, they may have a negative impact, meaning that you should almost fade the buyers when formulating probabilities. So that's a concept I don't think a lot of people would fully understand, but it's something that definitely exists. Where if you're scanning the past performances, and I'm just saying this in general, I don't think it applies to every single piece of data in the past performances. But if you're looking at stuff that every other horse player is looking at, it's really, really tough to find horses that are going to outrun their odds. So definitely an important thing to understand.
Yeah, I really like what you said, and like you said, I try to explain this to people, but it is hard to understand. I think for many, in that, yeah, there's information that helps you understand, which horses are more likely to win. Um, and there's certain ways to look at that information to deduce that, but that's what everybody else is doing. So it will, when you're first learning, you've got to learn that so you understand, what other people, how other people think, but also you understand sort of fundamentals about how to, predict who's going to win a race. But it's not going to help you make money. It might help you pick winners, but it won't help you make money because in order to make money, you have to have a different opinion than the public, and it has to be sharper. And like you said, you could use the same information if you actually look at it differently. So, like you said, maybe there's something that everybody overplays, like buyer figures. The best last out buyer. Let's say people tend to overbet those horses. Well, you can use that information just differently. Instead of using that to bet on that horse with the best last out buyer, you use that information, to look for a reason not to bet on that horse. So if you can form a contrarian opinion using the same information, that's one way to get an edge. The other way is to have information that other people don't have, which you mentioned as well. So, can you maybe talk about how a computer model might help you do either of those things, to gain an edge?
Yeah, sure. I think the first thing I wanted to say was, a good example of what you're saying about buyers being overbet. And I don't want people to, think that that doesn't mean that a horse doesn't have a good chance to win. Because I feel like when I explain this to people, that's where they automatically go to. What I'm saying is what a model would do with overbet last out buyers is there could be, for simplicity's sake, a even money horse. And let's forget about takeout for a second. Say that like the implied probability is 50% for that horse. What a model would do with it, if that horse had a last out best buyer, would say the model might say, oh, that horse has a 48% chance, and that 2% might be reallocated to some of the other horses for whatever reasons. But I think it's important to understand that that horse still has a 48% chance to win the race. It's just that if you actually bet that horse, it's going to be a negative expected value. And what was the second? Can you repeat the
Well,
second part?
so there was to me, there's two kind of basic ways to get an edge. One is to take the same information other people have, but approach it with a contrarian opinion so that you actually use it in a different way than they do, which is kind of what the best last out buyer example, where people will play that because it does mean the horse might be more likely to win. But since everybody knows that, it actually gets over bet, and the value is actually negative. So that you kind of talked about that one. But the other is you've got information that other people don't have. I mean, it might be insider information, that they've been working this horse at 3 a.m. and it's firing bullets every time. That's the kind of silly one. But other information you might have in terms of back when Andy Beyer first started his speed figures, they weren't publicly available, kind of thing.
Yeah, like let's take, for simplicity's sake, like workout data, where I mean, I see people talk about workouts, but who in their right mind knows how to examine all the available workout data out there and really truly understand, what that data is actually telling you. So you've got all of these publicly available workout times, but what a computer model would do is take all that data and maybe find certain patterns or whatnot that would, maybe explain a workout better than everybody else. So I would consider that non-publicly available data, because a model might grade a workout a lot differently than, some of the publicly available workout reports out there. I'm not saying that there's like maybe necessarily a lot of contrarian angles when it comes to that, but just a different interpretation of workouts than what everyone else is looking at. I mean, maybe that is considered contrarian, just now that I said that out loud, but I think that's like I would consider that data that's not publicly available, I guess, is just a different interpretation and grading of workout data. Because I mean, ultimately, that's kind of what I do when it comes to workouts is for my own opinions based off of workouts, and that's a whole separate process for me, and part of um, you know part of my one of my several models. So it's I think that's I think that answers your question.
Yeah, and that's a great example of how the computer can just process more information than people and might you know, identify patterns that a person would never be able to identify just because it can't process, that the data, like you said, looking at every workout that was ever published kind of thing.
Yeah, I
And
think
you can
that's no, sorry to cut you off, but I think that's like an important thing what you just said, and one of the real perks of using a computer to help with your analysis is that, you know, in 2023, the amount of computing power available out there is pretty unbelievable. Where depending how much you're willing to pay, you can have 60 to 100 uh, computers working for you all at one point remotely via some sort of server. And I know people who do this for a living who have their own servers, and um, but just like compare that to one person just looking at one thing at a time. And I think that's something that's not discussed enough when it comes to the computer players and the advantage that you get from that. Of course, there are people who could do it on their own by looking at one thing, and that's impressive. But I think that is one of the main advantages of building a model and using a computer in general is just the computing power that goes along with it. It's basically 100 brains working all at once to crunch data.
So you mentioned you have several models. Do you use different models for different kinds of races or different kinds of bets? How do the models vary?
Yeah, so like I gave one example just with workouts, and like I'll look at workout data to form my own workout variables, right? So I'm converting workout data into my own proprietary data, and I'm taking that data and using it in other models. So you've got different models when it comes to predicting different things. So that's to what they call engineer a feature. Other types of models, or ultimately, I think what people really care about is what a final model looks like. Is ultimately what is the final probability, or what is your uncertain estimated probability for a given horse? And I think that's one thing that I've kind of been vocal about on Twitter from time to time is that there are a lot of models out there. They all give you an estimate, their best guess of what a probability of a horse should be, or what the odds line should be on a horse. And that doesn't mean it's written in stone what that actual probability is. And I think I don't know. Again, just based on some of my discussions with lay people, I think when they hear about people building models, they just assume that that person is really good at coming up with probabilities, and that's just not always the case. There's been a recent example that I just continue to laugh about, and I think a lot of people on Twitter laugh about, where the ESPN analytics predicted that the Miami Heat only had a 3% chance to beat Boston in that series. Not sure if you're an NBA fan, but and meanwhile the gambling markets were basically giving Miami, I can't remember, I want to say like a 30% chance or 25% chance or something like that. So my point is that you know, models in general are very, very difficult to calibrate to actual results. And you know, it's the little edges that you can create um, that make it worth the squeeze. And just getting back to what I was originally saying, sorry to scramble a little bit here, but the probabilities that ultimately that I come up with, and I think that with many people come up with, are very, very uncertain. And there's definitely error included in every probability that you make. Meaning that I could say a horse is a 25% chance to win, but my model might be saying to me, oh, the confidence isn't really great there. So that horse could be a 20% horse, it could be a 30% horse. And when you're trying to construct bets and find overlays, and it's very difficult to find a race like that or take a race like that and actually construct a bet. So um, that's a whole other thing when it comes to models that people probably don't understand, is that the final probabilities you come up with are extremely uncertain, and that's just the nature of building a model. And if you always take your probability at face value, it'll probably perform well. It usually performs well in testing, but when you actually get to production and using it on an everyday basis, it might not work out like you think.
So let's talk a little bit about that. You're saying, there's error bars around every point estimate that comes out of the model, and you want to use that. Let's just keep the simple win pool. Your model said 25% using your example, and you're looking at the odds board or so first question I have is, have you does your model do you have automated wagering? Does the model make the wagering decisions, or do you just have it spit things out and then you make, the wagers? How automated is your betting process associated with the model?
I have different ways to do this. So I can actually um, have everything be automated, where I don't even necessarily need to be at a computer. I can also, be at the computer and watch what the model's actually doing as it takes in the real time data, and then I could push a button which would fire my bets in. Or I could do what you're saying, which is just take the model, it'll spit it out, and then maybe I don't necessarily agree with how what it's telling me to do. I rarely do this, but I might manually make a bet myself.
So let's kind of the model then has this 25% probability plus or minus something that
Hmm.
it'll give a 90% confidence it's within a certain range. And you're it's coming that either the model or you are looking at the odds board as long as you can, waiting the last second, and you have a price on a horse, but there's an error bar around that too, because we all complain about the late price changes. Um, have you modeled those late price changes to get a better idea of which ways they go? And do you then look at um, what you are predicting coming out of your model versus what the public is saying on the tote, and taking into account the possibility that the model's off or the tote odds are off? You build in some margin for error and make a betting decision. I mean, how do you make your decision on whether or not you have value and you're gonna bet?
Yeah, a lot to unload there. So first thing is, I know I think Maury said it, but like if you're gonna do this seriously, professionally, whatever, it's borderline lazy to not have a full understanding of what's going to happen in that last flash. I think just like understanding, what your final price is going to be. So I yes, I have studied those last flashes and understand uh, where I think the money's going to go. Is it perfect? No way. It's there's a lot of noise, I think, when you're actually building a model like that, but I think it more often than not does the job. So I have fair estimates of where I think horses will land, and you know there's a good enough correlation there that I'm very happy with it. When it comes to actually firing a bet, uh, what my, I don't know if this is, I don't really consider this a model, but if you're doing this as a computer player, you almost certainly need some sort of odds feed that you're receiving, and what that allows you to do is scan each of the pools. And why is that important? Because you always want to be betting, or you want to be as much as possible getting the best price possible, but also not betting enough to where you're betting your edge away. So I'm constantly scanning the win pool, the exacta pools, the double pools, etc., where it's taking into account what my probability is, what my what you called error bands in, and ultimately making a decision of whether something is eligible to be bet, which is a mathematical process. And um, like I said, it all goes back to some sort of weighted expected value formula where, again, I'm taking probabilities, accounting for some sort of error, and seeing if for every dollar I bet, is it going to be north of a dollar? And, if you have some sort of threshold, I think you kind of alluded to that. Just some sort of threshold to say, like, all right, I only want to bet horses that would give me $1.03 on average. And then obviously anything that would return less than a dollar, easily no bet.
So, how do you size your bets? If you have a bigger edge, do you bet more? I mean, do you use like a Kelly formula, which I won't get into here, but I can send some links to listeners to understand that. But I mean, how do you size your bets? Are they flat bets? Are they sized somehow? I'm thinking the win pool here, but in general.
Yeah, I use fractional Kelly, and we don't, like you said, we don't have to get into it. I think I would just say it is very, 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 very difficult, in my opinion, for a layperson to use the Kelly criterion. If you're not coming up with your own probabilities, of course, um, and if you're betting full Kelly, you're going to experience way more variance than you would prefer, which is why I think a lot of people use some sort of fractional Kelly. So to answer your question, yes, if I feel like I have a bigger edge, I will scale up, and vice versa. If it's a small edge, depending on what threshold I think is appropriate, and that kind of goes back to the error bands too. Like I will lower my threshold if I have more confidence in a race. But ultimately, I'm scaling my bet size according to what my perceived edge would be, and that's done via the fractional Kelly criterion.
All right, I don't want to go. I'm afraid
Yeah,
we'll
yeah,
lose
yeah.
some listeners, but that's good because I'm sure there are some model-based players that are interested in how you do that, and certainly Kelly's kind of a proven way, and fractional Kelly is. I don't know anybody that tries to apply Kelly that doesn't use some fractional approach. I
Yeah.
think that makes a lot of sense. So I want to talk a little bit about do you try to look at every kind of race and let the model make decisions, or as it evolved over time, there's certain types of races that the model hones in on, by track or surface or distance or class? I mean, or is just looking at everything out there and just finds bets? Just curious, or you have different models for different kinds of races? Just curious how you approach that.
Yeah, this is a really good question. And it's something that if you're going to sit down and build a model, it's one of the first questions you kind of need to answer is what is your approach? When I started doing this, I foolishly made the decision to just take every single race in the database and try to model it. And don't get me wrong, there's probably some positives to doing that, and some really good information you can get out of that. But I think that's another reason why I kind of struggled in the beginning was because of my approach with that. And not all races are equal, as you kind of just said. And um, this day and age, I think um, I'm a little bit more segmented than that, or a lot of it more segmented than that, where a turf sprint allowance race is going to be a lot different than a 5,000 maiden claimer going a mile on the dirt. Like there's going to be different variables that are just way more important in each race. So, um, I'm careful to say that segmenting your data to create different models for different races is important. But I feel like that's, based on what I've read and seen other people do, they kind of take the conditions of a race and build a model accordingly, rather than the take every single race approach. I think there's, like I said, some validity to doing it that way. But in my opinion, there's no right or wrong way to do things. What has worked for me is probably being a little bit more segmented.
So in that segmentation, were there um, certain types of races that you just were could just fail to be able to model in a way that was profitable, and some that just were much better, and you've kind of focused on those? Or I'm just curious, how that shook out as you work through it.
Yeah, I think some races are a little bit more efficient than others, certainly. And I think, everything is going to depend on the data that you have, right? So, it's very, um, let's just take maiden races, for example. I think a lot of people find them very difficult to handicap, but I think because of that, it provides more opportunity to make money on those types of races. And I know a lot of people similar to myself who kind of take that approach and crush maiden races. For me, I don't think my data set is particularly suited for those types of races, and those are easily my worst. Where I I think I make money on them, but it's not. I don't have like an ROI to write home about. So my data set is probably more suited for non-maiden races, I would say. So I think the key thing to is what I'm saying is that it really really depends on what kind of available data that you have in order to come up with probabilities that are going to make you money, and you're finding horses that are going to outrun their odds. So, um, for me personally, it's maiden races that I kind of break even at, let's just say. And for other people, they might have data that's more suitable for maiden races. So, um, just it depends on what kind of data you have.
All right, so you do some segmentation based on the race types and stuff. What about the different pools? I mean, are you involved in every pool? Are you just certain pools? Where do you focus most of your wagering on in terms of pools? Is it horizontal, vertical? Is it, when, or is it simple exotics, complex exotics? I'm just curious how you approach that because, certainly the complexity goes up with the exotic wagers, especially the multi-race or, tries and supers. You have less transparency into the data in the pools, and you probably have more opportunity. So I'm just curious how you approach that.
Yeah, very good question. Another thing that I think a lot of modelers would need to figure out before they even start building models is how you're going to take your models and attack the pools. For myself, I like to keep it simple. I primarily, not exclusively, but primarily play the win pool, exacta pool, and double pool. I have very, very little experience playing horizontals. And I think, am I giving up ROI by not figuring those out? Probably. but I think the trade-off for me is keeping my execution simple. And until I see some ROI erosion in those pools, I'm very happy with keeping it very, very simple where I'm scanning those three pools primarily.
And is that part of the reason you don't focus on those as you have that transparency into those pools versus,
Ye-
once you get beyond that, you no longer can actually see any tote information in the other pools, right?
Right. That's kind of how that's how it started, where okay, I have an odds feed. And so now I can see all the visibility, transparency of what potential payoffs can be. I can incorporate those into all my formulas and probabilities, and for me that was important initially, and it's also important for me now. And yeah, like I said, are there hidden pools where I could probably develop more models to estimate payoffs and probably gain more ROI? Yes, but as I said, I'm happy with the simplicity that uh, I have right now when it comes to execution.
So you talked about when you made the transition to to racing and then actually started trying to, you know, pretty much do it full time. Um, what how did you figure out when you were ready to do that? Were you back testing your models? Were you doing it at a small scale with success? I mean, when you were you confident enough to say, I'm ready for the big time to, try to do the, cash betting, make a profit on this, that I can make a living on?
Um, I think I kind of alluded to this earlier, but I kind of got fast tracked over COVID, where I was getting a little burnt out with my normal career, and I had a great career, met a lot of great people along the way, but I was a little burnt out, and it was in the height of COVID. I was working remotely, and that didn't really jive with me, even though that's what I do now. But like, I was having success with um, some sports betting stuff, and I was really ramping up my horse racing from uh, being a small time better to what I would consider a medium sized better, and starting to see success. And on top of that, uh, I was having the tournament success. And I know that that's not translating over to cash betting, but it was more just I was in a really, really good situation to be able to make that decision. I had the confidence, which was extremely important. I had a relatively good grasp of my emotions, which is also an important thing to be able to do this every single day. And ultimately, it was just the confidence that pushed me over the edge, and I made the decision, and frankly, never looked back. So, it wasn't an easy decision, but it was something that, I alluded to this earlier too. Like, gambling has always been my primary hobby, I guess, across my life, and you always think about doing something like this full time. And back in 2021, like I said, the situation was there, the confidence was there, my financials were in order, and I made the decision. So I'm very happy I did.
So you've talked a lot about you were into the sports betting side of things. What did you learn through sports betting that you think helps you in the horse play side of it? Maybe an advantage that maybe players who don't have that experience, that you gain as through that sports betting his,
Yeah,
past.
great question. Because that's kind of where I cut my teeth with gambling. I think, like I said, I was way more involved with sports betting than horse racing initially, and you learn some concepts pretty much right away if you want to take sports betting seriously. And the first thing is just understanding probability theory. And what I really mean by that is, when you look at a sports book and the prices that they're offering, same thing with horse racing, that every price they're offering, um, there's a certain implied probability that goes along with it. And I think as a kid, or just as a novice bettor, I never thought like that. I didn't know that, if you see a plus 300 money line, that the simple implied probability of that is going to be, 25%. So like, you should only be betting a price like that when it's north of 25% for, simplicity's sake there. But, I think that's something that a lot of novice bettors don't take into account. And, um, to me, that's everything when it comes to placing a bet, is that it comes down to what price are you getting? What's the associated probability? What's your probability? And, what's the expected value? So, I never heard the term expected value until I really started taking sports betting seriously, and was starting to, make sizable bets accordingly. So I think, when it comes to sports betting, that's probably the number one thing that I've learned.
So for you, sports betting, it's not picking. It was pretty obvious you weren't just picking winners. You were trying to find a price that you thought was worth playing, right? That was your focus.
100%. And that'll never change. I mean, when it comes to any sort of gambling, whether it be sports betting, horse racing, uh, even some in assets like stocks. I mean, you really should be pricing things in terms of probability, um, of how things would move or what price you're getting. So yeah, it all boils down to price and probability.
And that's just sort of ingrained in your thinking as a sports player, a sharp player. I mean, not someone that actually understands what they're doing. It's just sort of second nature. And that the funny part, and this came up in previous discussions with some of the guests, is that's just not the second nature of a lot of horse players. They're just focused on picking winners, and they don't even think about that price part.
Yeah.
Which is kind of amazing. But there are some players who've been doing this for a long time, and they still, and they're sharp, smart, and they're good at identifying winners, but they don't consider value at all. They just pick the horse they like. They pick the winner and bet it, and they don't really, without regard to price, they think that horse is the winner. They'll bet that. Now, some of them may decide they won't bet at a certain price, but you'll never see them bet on their second or third choice in a race, even if that's the one where, maybe there's more value. They don't think that way. They just think, who's the most likely winner in this race, and I'm going to bet that horse, or maybe I'll decide whether or not I'm going to bet that horse. But they never ever think about playing a horse that might not be the one they think is most likely to win. Where I'm guessing, I shouldn't assume that, like in your models, you're playing horses that are the second, third, fourth choice if they think they offer value.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I hate to say this and for people to take it the wrong way, because there's many different ways to be a profitable bettor in horse racing. But for me, it it's a math problem. And I've kind of been vocal about this on Twitter at times, where I'm very, very impressed with people who don't use a model and can be profitable. I think that's amazing. And I foolishly used to think that if you didn't have a model, you were a loser, and that's just dead wrong. But yes, I mean, what you're saying is, when I say price and probability, I'm really just turning a horse race into a math problem. And I've said that in the past. People take it the wrong way, and I was notorious initially for like not knowing horses' names and not knowing who the jockey is or trainer was, and like people just they think it's impossible to beat horse racing if you don't know information like that. And that type of information is embedded in my data, of course, but like just because I, Dennis, don't know who I don't know, Evan Roman is or something and how good he is on the turf, it's people think that it's impossible to win and uh I mean, maybe, but for me, it's just like that type of information is embedded in my data. And again, it just comes down to price and probability for me. And that's simply a mathematical formula. So that's my approach. It works for me. I know it works for some other people, but as you're kind of saying, I'm in awe of people who particularly do this professionally and don't use a model.
Well, they're always using a model, but it's
Mm,
what I call a mental model. It may not be explicit mathematical model, but the ones who understand value, they have a model in their head. It may be somewhat intuitive, but it's still there, and
yeah, sharp. That's a good point.
it's just not a computer model. But to be successful, or at least that if you have any kind of process, you're working off a model, whether it's a mental model or a computer model. But there's certainly advantages and disadvantages to both. And as computer power and more data becomes available, it starts slanting the playing field towards the computers and away from the people. And I think we're seeing that. And you are a computer assisted wagerer, but you're not one of the big teams, and they're out there and they're a major competition. So I'm just curious, what your thoughts are about how you take on that challenge, and do you try to model their behavior in any way? I think it sounds like you do. And what you think about that and how you factor that into your modeling, into your play.
Yeah, like I alluded to earlier, you kind of have to have an understanding of where you think they're going to be on a horse, and or what prices are they going to attack when there's 0 minutes to post. And yeah, frankly, they are the competition, but there are things to learn and grasp from them that I don't want to say are publicly available, but you could, since they are, quote unquote, the market makers. um like I said, there's things to learn from them. So I don't want to say that's all I do is study their behavior, but it's a big thing. I think if you're going to be doing this every day and trying to make an income, you have to have a full understanding of what they're doing. And I certainly don't just like get upset when, they knock my price down on a horse. It's just kind of part of the game. And you just learn from it as much as you can. There's uh there's no perfect market out there. And horse racing has CAWs to deal with, but sports betting, like I said earlier, I mean, there's times where you can't even get a bet down. So like, what I mean by that is just there's no perfect markets out there. Each of them has their own pitfalls, and you just have to kind of learn and adapt. And there really is no other choice, in my opinion, with that.
So you said that you kind of you try to understand the behaviors. Is there anything about the way they behave that insights that you've learned or willing to share about, that could be, help the listeners, um, when they're thinking through what they're going to play, knowing that those teams are out there?
Yeah, the one tidbit I'll say is check out the Naira win pool. And I know it's highly debated whether the CAWs are in that pool or not. I know Naira says that they're not. Uh, but the efficiency of the exact and double pool compared to the win pool is night and day. And that could present some opportunities if you're a win pool better, knowing that those pools are more efficient. Now, of course, you need to know where the computer teams are going to lean there, but I think that is the only instance in North America that I can think of where computer teams are theoretically not allowed to bet within, I think it's 3 minutes to post or something like that. So it presents some interesting win prices versus the exacted double pools and some of the other pools as well. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, that's exactly the example that Maury cited on the
Oh, you
last
did?
podcast. Yeah, he thought there was a lot that could be learned from that, and maybe some opportunity at least for a while. As same thing you said. It's sort of an experiment, his way he termed it, out there where
Mm,
you can kind of see, uh, you know, here's one pool where they're supposedly not playing. Here's where they are. How do they compare? And you can get a better idea of what they're doing. So, and that's a great example. I think two pretty sharp people have brought that up already on the podcast. Probably worth some of the players, especially if you're playing New York circuit, to pay attention to that if you haven't already done so.
just because it's the day after the Belmont Stakes. I mean, uh, I know you had Arcangelo. I had him as well. I had Tapper Trice as well, and both those horses were just overlays in the win pool compared to the other pools. Um, Tapper Trice was probably a little more colder than I think a lot of people thought he was going to be, but part of that was because he was bet slightly more in the exacted double pools, I believe. I can't recall off the top of my head, but it's opportunities like that happen all the time. Of course, you need to know where they're going to land, but that is the one anomaly type pool out there right now where very, very liquid. So I would point your listeners in that direction.
Yeah, that's a great example. All right, so let's go on to a couple other topic. Anything else though before I do that you want to talk about on your models, or anything we've covered already that there was something you wanted to say that you haven't gotten out on that yet?
Yeah, there was just one more thing that you asked about, like the different types of models. Um, the one thing I also wanted to mention, and it goes hand in hand with I think being a better is uh is race selection. And because on any given Saturday there's a lot of races throughout the day, I will actually I have some sort of model that basically points me in the direction of races I should be focusing on when it comes to uh, potential money making opportunities, or potential edges, I should say, that are going to be out there. And I think this is important for someone like myself, who's not the typical niche horse player that might focus on a track or something like that. But in this day and age, we know field size is sort of an issue, or it is an issue, and it might prevent some potential edges to be out there. I just think that race selection is something that every bettor should try to master as much as possible when it comes to finding edges. You I think you said it earlier, just about um, I can't remember what was said, but my point is that, like, there's going to be races where if you have five horses in a field and there's a 2 to 5 favorite, that 2 to 5 favorite sucks up so much of the value, potential value in a given pool. Do they lose? Yeah, of course they lose, and you can have the other horse, you can bet all the other horses and probably make money. But my point is that finding races, targeting races that tend to be a little bit more chaotic, I guess, um, really is what I focus on and present the edges that I'm looking for. So typically, like I said earlier, my model might not be as confident, but the potential prices that I'm getting are going to be a little bit wider and present more opportunities. So just a note on race selection, I think, is very important, and it kind of goes hand in hand with my models, since it targets the races to focus on in a given day.
So those chaotic races, other than field size, any other sort of basic factors like we already said maiden races are probably a little more chaotic, but that wasn't in your wheelhouse. Any other kinds of factors that might make a race more chaotic other than field size that you're looking for in race selection?
Uh, surface to some extent. Uh, I I have, one of my variables is a competition type variable that weighs the chaos, I guess. More competitive races, I guess, is what I'm saying. So yeah, I mean, and your point on maidens is right. I think if I data mine my results over the last 2 years, I'm probably a winner in races, in maiden races, where I'm only targeting like the very best races. And when you do this and you have enough sample size to look at results, it's instances like that where it points you into where you should be and kind of learn from that. We could talk about record keeping too, because that's a big part of my day to day as well. Just understanding where you're good and where you're not. But that's a perfect example of, you know, I say I'm a break even maiden player. I'm probably slightly profitable, but I'm going to be more profitable if I only target, a specific set of races. Now, that's what's called overfitting, I think, and or backfitting. Basically, only you know, hypothetically, I would be profitable if I only bet these races, but I think there's some signal in there to basically say, you have this race selection method, and if you only looked at the top half of the races that are saying to play, you would have a nice ROI there. So, um, yeah, I guess a couple things there, but I guess the last thing I was saying was just learn from your records. I keep very, very detailed records of all the races I bet, what types of wagers, and what types of races, and just constantly trying to learn from it on a daily basis, pretty much. I mean, it's after like a long day of betting, like the last thing you want to do is sit down and really review your results and analyze your data. But I think it's the difference between being like a decent player versus a really, really good player. Like always learn from your mistakes and frankly learn from your wins too. Like why do you think you had a really good day today? And like what led to that? And make sure that keep doing that or even make it even better. So record keeping
So,
very important.
yeah, so you use it to kind of on a regular basis look and kind of do a lessons learned, what worked, what didn't, but also longer term trends in terms of, like you said, where you're successful and how you might, through better race selection, improve your ROI.
Yeah, yeah, and frankly, I've started to keep a journal over the last 3 months, I think, just journaling my thoughts throughout a day, just to it ends up being like useful for idea generation, like maybe jotting down something to test or look at, but also maybe like some sort of anomalies that I'm seeing in a pool or something like that. Just kind of journaling my thoughts and then at the end of the day, kind of reviewing everything in it and continuing to add some more lessons learned, like you said.
That's really interesting and cool. So can you give us some examples of maybe some things you've put in your journal that turned out to help you, further on down the road?
I think I've said I've been doing this for 3 months, like writing it down, but I think ultimately I've always kind of had a lesson learned approach where I'm reviewing my results. But I feel like everything I'm saying right now has become from making a mistake and learning from it. So like there's no better way to learn than actually like doing the job for years and just learning from it. But specific example, I mean, honestly, the whole Naira win pool thing, not to harp on it again, but I remember when they made that decision, I think it was back in 2021, just kind of observing some patterns there, and and then reviewing some of the tote data to kind of back up what I was seeing. Like, are they targeting the early speed horses like we normally think they do? And they do a lot, but you know, I uh, I don't want to get into it too deep into the journal, but uh, I just think it's very, very helpful if you're going to do this with any sort of consistency. I think every day or every weekend. I think or I know personally myself, I just like the worst possible thing for me is to make the same mistake twice. And believe me, I've done it, and it's tough. It's tough to deal with, and I feel like the journal has helped me avoid that and maybe express some of my emotions as well. But most importantly, to generate some new ideas and learn from your mistakes.
I like that. Definitely, this game has changed a lot since I started playing, and if you're not adapting, change is not a requirement. Survival is not necessary. So,
I
so,
like that. Yeah.
but if you want to survive, or better yet, thrive, you have to constantly learn. When you're people, I think people understand that when they first start something, right? You've got to learn. But what I think people underestimate is how important it is to keep learning, even after you've gotten good and had success in something. You can't just rest on your laurels. The world changes so quickly. You have to continually adapt and learn. So I really like you know, your process, and that idea of a journal is something I don't do that. I haven't thought about that, but even if you don't write it down, like you said, kind of review what you've done and reflect on it on a regular basis certainly makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and the one warning I would say is don't don't make a change too quickly. I guess you want to make sure that if you're making a change to your approach, make sure there's enough sample size there and that you're confident that the change would lead to more profits. I've been guilty of that as well, and only for it to actually be not worth the change at all. Um, Obviously, when it comes to math and statistics, sample size is extremely important. It's not everything. You can learn stuff from smaller samples, but uh, when you're reviewing your records, I typically like to, have enough, a significant uh, sample size to make some sort of change or to understand, like, all right, maybe this isn't the right approach, or maybe I need to slightly tweak it. I've kind of been vocal about that on Twitter. I think my last post just about like being honest with yourself. If like, like the whole, again, the example with the mating races, I had this bias where I'm like, these are supposed to be the easier races to make money with. Like, but it wasn't happening for me. And it kind of weighs on you. Like, why am I not doing better in mating races? And ultimately, like when you review your data, like when I review my data, like I just don't have like the best data for maidens. But it's it's important to understand that the sample size needs to be there in order for you to make a decision. And um, don't make a change too quickly, I guess is all I'm saying.
Yeah, you're right. It's a fine line between you have to have, to me, you have to establish a process, and then you want to refine that process over time, but you don't want to be changing it every day because then you never really have a process. You never know if you're having any success because you don't keep at the same thing long enough to ever find out how well it works, right?
Yeah, you want to see things play out. And it might be painful to do that because it's very easy to lose in this game, given that, obviously the pricing isn't there, but also you could be betting on low probability events. And, compared to sports betting, where you're typically betting on, just call it a 50-50 proposition. Horse racing, I doubt anyone's just playing even money favorites. So, the variance and the grind that goes with it could be painful, but I still think it's important to see it out, amass a sample, given that process, like you're saying, and then adjust accordingly and learn along the way. Like I wouldn't know any other way on how to do this, but like you're saying, things change every day. The competition continues to get better. More data available. You have to just continue to learn and learn and learn, or else. And look, if you're not a serious player, then by all means disregard all this. But if you're actually trying to do this with any sort of consistency and break even or make some profit, then like you're saying, have a process, see it out, and adjust accordingly.
Yeah, and the modeling kind of forces you into. I mean, I guess you could be changing your model every day, but I mean, having a model sort of makes you. It sort of builds a process in. Where if you're not a modeler, you've got to develop a process for
Right.
analyzing a race and making decisions. Doesn't have to be a computer-based way, but you can still have a process even without a computer. And then, like you said, give it a chance, keep records, track your progress, and tweak or completely revamp depending on what feedback you get through the record
Yeah.
keeping. But you can't get better at anything without feedback. And if you don't, you get some feedback in racing. One thing nice about it is you get feedback all the time. But if you don't sort of track that over time, you don't really understand what it's telling you. You just react emotionally to whatever happens, good or bad. Um, Without that record keeping and tracking it over a longer time frame, you can't really learn from it. You definitely can go on the most emotional roller coaster, but you don't really. At least you can learn some, but you can't learn nearly as much as if you keep some records and you keep track of your performance.
That's a great way to put it. And like the most painful type of feedback in horse racing is, you bet, you have a big edge on a 10-1 shot, let's just say, and it loses by a nose. Like how do you personally grade that? Like it's you lost your bet if you're only playing it to win, but it did exactly pretty much what you thought it was gonna do, and it just lost literally by a whisker. So like, it's as painful as that is, there's context there, in that that's sort of a win in my book when something like that happens. And I'm not saying that's the end all be all of like being able to grade a race, but it's painful. But there's definitely context there that you were on the right horse at that price, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, the way I talk about it is, um, you can, results matter long term, but short term, they really you shouldn't matter much, especially race to race, day to day. The results aren't what matter. Long term, though, results are everything. But short term, it's all about process and decision making. That's all you can control. And so you want to make sure that you follow your process and you think you made good decisions, and then the results are what the results are. So to me, it's like it's the matter of the context is around it's temporal. The immediate near term, it's all about process, decision making, not results.
Yeah, well
Long
said.
term, it's all about results. I mean, you can't justify if you say you're making a good decision, you have a good process, but long term, the data does not reflect that, then you're lying to yourself. But assuming you've had success, and you continue your process and you're making good decisions and you have some good bad results or bad days, that's okay. You should still feel like you're doing the right thing. But if over time that changes and your results are bad, then you have to start thinking, okay, what do I need to do to improve my process and get better results? But I think you really have to kind of not think about results in the immediate and the short near term, and really focus on process and decision making. But long term, you have to focus on results, and the only way you can do that is if you keep some sort of records, right?
Yeah, and I had a post about this, just about being real with yourself. That when the losses are piling up, long term, of course, enough sample, that you got to be real with yourself and understand that it's not working. And again, this is only if you're trying to do this with the intention of making profit. And um, it's going to happen where you need to have, you know, a come to Jesus moment or whatever with yourself, that what you're doing right now isn't working, and then trying to understand why it isn't working. Why did you originally think it was going to work? And just kind of self evaluate. And it's difficult. Like, here's where like models don't come into play at all, because this is all stuff that you need to figure out yourself, really. I mean, you could point to certain statistics and whatnot to evaluate your play, but ultimately, there's a human factor of understanding, like, why isn't this working? What do I need to be doing differently? And um, I don't think a lot of people actually do that. I think they attribute a lot to variance and bad luck and losing by a nose, like I said earlier, just that, like, then they think it's going to get better. And there's just got to be a point where you self-evaluate that something isn't working. And I hate to harp on it again, but again, that's kind of what happened with me and maidens. And um, I've spent way more time than I wanted to, just kind of evaluating my play in maidens. But I'm optimistic about the future, and um, all because I've basically just told myself, like, something isn't working here as you had thought it was, and that's a problem, and something needs to be edited. So
Yeah, I really like what you said there, and I would just add that even if you've had a lot of success, even maybe for a long time, it doesn't mean that. In fact, I almost guarantee you that it won't continue forever because things change so quickly, especially now it's accelerating. So if you've got it, you have to at some point recognize that what was successful for you in the past isn't working anymore. So even if you have been successful, if you're not doing that and not monitoring your results, and you could slip into a long-term slump and that you might attribute to bad luck, but over the long term that evens out, and that's just another reason why you have to continually kind of monitor, get the feedback, and improve over time.
that's very typical with model performance as well, where there's just an erosion of performance over time, particularly with gambling markets. I'm saying, if you keep things stagnant, uh, you know, forever, then eventually that model is just going to be a loser because the market is getting better and your model staying the same. So um, I'm just echoing what you're saying about being able to adapt.
Yeah, and that's a great example because it gets back to what we started talking about earlier on, how what's baked into the price. No matter how smart you are, you come up with an edge. Other people are smart too, and they'll figure that out. Maybe you're on the leading edge, but eventually others catch up, and that basically becomes publicly available in essence and baked into the odds. So almost any edge, I would say not just a model, but any edge you come up with, the value will evaporate over time. And that was one of the things Maury talked about in the last Bet with the Best podcast, how you've got to constantly looking for these new edges because once you find them, you've got to aggressively exploit them because they won't last forever.
And that's, yeah. My other recent post was, the flip side of evaluating your losing approach is actually being uncomfortably aggressive when you have something that's an edge. And it's something that I think a lot of people probably regret not betting more or bigger when you have an edge. And I'm just echoing that point that edges, they come and go, and when they go, that source of income is now gone. So, and I've experienced this firsthand, more on the sports betting side of things, I would say, but you know, there's always that regret, I guess, of not just slamming markets for what given what they're giving you, and just dealing with any repercussions. So, um, it's the flip side of kind of what I'm saying of being real with yourself when you're losing, but when you have something good, uh, get uncomfortable.
Yes, carpe diem.
Yeah, not financial advice, by the way.
Uh, okay, so you touched on rebates. The rebates you found to be really enticing. That's one of the things that got you a little more interested in playing horses. To the rebates, it doesn't sound like they've really shaped your play because you can get bigger rebates on some of the more exotic pools, but you stayed more, like you said, kept it simple and stayed more focused. Anything else on the rebate side?
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat as Mike Maloney, just in terms of like what my effective takeout is going to be. And yeah, like I said, there's a trade-off I made when it came to keeping it simple versus some of the more exotic pools where my effective takeout's going to be the same, meaning my rebates are higher, but the complexity of execution would requires more work, and I just haven't felt the need to do that yet. But yeah, I mean, look, this day and age, given the pricing for what it is, it's pretty much a requirement to be profitable. Um, Anyone who could beat it without rebate, I applaud you. But it's to actually source an income by grinding day to day, which is my approach. Like, you need to reduce that takeout. So that's just my take on rebates.
Sorry, I was on mute.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I caught me. I try not to do that, but I got caught there. I was talking to myself for a second. So another, rebates are one way to reduce price, and it's, targeted towards the heavier players. But one sort of rebate that anyone can take advantage of is the carryover. Um, do you target carryovers? It doesn't sound like you probably do, given your win exacta double kind of approach, but do you make exceptions? Do you go after carryovers at all? Just curious, is that part of your play?
No, not really. Um, I might dabble here and there, but it's more what I would consider like a degen bet, just an action bet. But yeah, it's you know, definitely not a big part of my handle at all. So
Okay, what about you come from a sports betting background. What about fixed odds? Is that something you've dabbled in or seriously do? Certainly a computer-based approach to that would make sense.
um, on the occasion, I will. Yesterday was a good example. Just there's certain sportsbook providers who provide fixed odds on like a Belmont Stakes type day. I know there are some offshore sites that do it as well. I know it's legal in Jersey. Fixed odds are actually legal in Colorado, where I reside, but no one is offering them. And I don't really know the politics behind it, other than that the ADWs are just threatening Colorado, I guess, to not do them. Don't quote me on that, but not really a big part of my play, or not a part of my play at all. There's obviously um, a negative side to fixed odds being legal, in that it's the same thing as sports betting, where they reserve the right to dictate your limit. And I kind of warn people about this all the time on Twitter. That's not to say that it's an opportunity, of course. I think the idea of fixed odds is a great idea. It's just I would get worried about the execution of only catering to losers. Um, hate to put it that way, but that's kind of how it is. Are there ways around getting bets down in general on a fixed odds opportunity or potential fixed odds opportunity? Yeah, of course. So the idea is good. The execution is what scares me. Um, Not a big part of my play.
Okay. What about foreign racing? Do you play any of the foreign tracks? Hong Kong, Europe, Australia?
So I don't, but um, it's always on my next thing to do list. The idea of Hong Kong um, is interesting to me, and a lot of people will reach out to me on Twitter, mostly from the sports betting world, asking me about scalability and the potential in horse racing. And a lot of times I refer them to Hong Kong as maybe being kind of a better way to start rather than North America, frankly. But it's not something that I've personally done yet at this point. Uh, but it's definitely something that I could see myself doing in the future. I know I have some friends who partake in that, and they always highly recommend it, giving it a shot. But I'm kind of happy with my workload right now as it is. So not yet, I would say, with foreign racing.
So it sounds like it's got you interested, but right now you feel like you're at a place that you're comfortable with, and until your edge starts to erode, you might continue to ride this. Seize the day for now with what you've got.
Yeah, taking on like a new market, new models that go along with it. It's a big undertaking, and I we just got done talking at length about evaluating your play and keeping on top of things, and I'm at the point where I think if I add anything else, I would start to sacrifice some of my ROI naturally. So yeah, like you said, if maybe it's something I consider down the road. Um, if uh, if I feel good about where I'm at with North American racing and sports betting here, but it's not something that I'm like dying to do right now, I would say.
So you mentioned, kind of hinted at time. How much time are you putting into this? I mean, and what eh, some people might imagine you just build the model and you sit back and smoke cigars and drink whiskey and celebrate. You see the cash register keeps going ka-ching, ka-ching, and then a little graph of profits go up. How much work, your time, do you have to put in the care and feeding of the model and babysitting it, or using it to execute wagers during the day?
What do they say? It's a hard way to make an easy living. I mean, truer words could never be spoken. I think yeah. I think there's a lot of maintenance that goes along with, like you said, babysitting your models and updating them. You've got uh, a boatload of data that needs to be managed. I have a developer that I use on a freelance basis to help me with things. And I wish it was as easy as you described and start drinking some whiskey, but that's just not the day to day. I mean, y- like we kind of talked about, there's a lot of self evaluation of your play. Um, what's working, what's not, why, trying to figure things out, trying to find new edges, trying to acquire new data. Uh, at some point, it's less about the actual betting and results and more about like, how do I stay ahead and how do I find new potential sources of income via edges, whether that's horse racing or sports betting, and how do you make that happen? And that's the real daily grind, in my opinion, is how to sustain this going forward and maintain your edge.
Yeah, you want to maintain that edge. That if you don't do that, you'll be back to the day job, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, you mentioned early on contest. You had some early contest success, and you've had some success since. That continue to be a part of your play, and how do you approach those differently than you do your day-to-day play? And is it computer based, just like you do normally, or do you do anything different for a contest?
Currently, I play less and less tournaments just because I like to focus on the day to day. Tournaments was my first love when it came to horse racing. I always make it a point to play the bigger contests, like the BCBC, the Pegasus. I can't play the Naira bets. They don't allow Colorado residents. I guess there's some sort of state law against that, so I can't play any of those right now. But um, I think the difference. I think Matt Miller, pretty who I finished. I finished third that year in the BCBC, and he passed me in the last race. That was a fun tournament, but he pretty much described like the game theory optimal approach, I would say. And I learned early on that you have to view your money as poker chips, as people say, and you got to be able to risk it. And I've done that several times, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. And it's I typically play to win only, and or in the BCBC case, maybe top 10, just because the payouts are pretty good when you're in the top 10 there. But it's a whole different game. Do I lean on my computer models to find overlays? Yeah, sure. But I think the strategy is going to be very, very different because it's more like a strategy game than a compared to the day-to-day grind of finding overlays and getting your money in when it's good. There's times in a tournament where that might not be the case. Um, this year's Pegasus, I was in the lead going into the last race, and I didn't want to stand pat and get passed because I wanted to win. And I covered, I think, close to 65% of what I thought was the probabilities of the field. I bet it all and I lost. And some people couldn't fathom that, but I kind of viewed it like a math problem and a game theory kind of approach where I was into the tournament for, I can't even remember, I don't know, 7,000 or something like that. And if the chips fall my way and the 65% probability comes in, then I think I had like a $250,000 payoff or something like that. And um, I don't, those types of equations come into play just on the day to day, but that's kind of it's all embedded in my model. Where tournaments, you're kind of doing that in your head on the fly, kind of like Matt Miller says, that you kind of have a number in mind of where you want to be and where you want to, how much you need to bet. How do you get to this amount in order to, maximize your final score? So it's completely different. I think a lot of people just like playing in tournaments, but don't think that way. And they add equity for me. They entice a lot of people to play because they don't really play to win, in my opinion, which is fine. Like it's money. Like I get people value money differently, and I think that's what creates a different perspective on the equity that these tournaments um, provide. But just to these days, I think I only am interested in the bigger tournaments where I can make a bigger score. Other than that, they're very, very fun to play because of the strategy behind it. But I focus on my day to day. I mean, Saturdays around here are just pretty chaotic as it is, and I would only want to. If I play a tournament, I want to be able to focus on it 100%.
Yeah, that's really good point. I mean, it is totally different than daily play. It's a game. It's with a different set of rules and a different strategies that maximize your chances of winning. And people complain about certain rule sets and stuff. Say, that's not the best horse player or handicapper or whatever. But that's it, those games aren't. They're really there. That's not what they're trying to prove. They're just a game. They're saying who's the best at the game. And if you understand that and you understand the rules and you think about, based on your strengths, how you can maximize your return, and it's just a different set of it's a different set of rules, but the same sort of thing. You're looking for value, just value's different in a contest than it is on a day-to-day bet.
Yeah, I'm not. When I play a tournament, I'm not trying to be the best horse player. I'm trying to win money. So, yeah, it's the rules are the rules. I know that there's just a lot of people like love and hate different formats. Like when it comes to the mythical contests and the pick and praise, and some people are just better at other formats than others, and to each their own. These are the rules. These are the prize pools. Everyone's trying to win the same money. So that's kind of the approach that that you should have. The game is the game, and how do I need to play it to extract as much money as I can out of it? So um, completely different than the day to day approach, I would say. So you know, I said this earlier, just that like I I came from a poker background, so I was part of the poker boom in the early 2000s or whenever that was, and really was enticed by the idea of horse racing tournaments. And I believe I used to live in Las Vegas out in Summerlin. I think the year I discovered the NHC was the year they had the tournament at Red Rock, which was down the block from where I lived. And I think I checked it out that year, and it was just like, I was like, oh, I want to be part of this. Like, I just knew like those tournaments were like where I wanted to be. I wanted to be in the room and whatnot, and be part of the horse players, and that was exciting. And I'm really surprised. Fast forward to 2023 now that tournaments aren't more popular than they are, and I'm not really sure why. I mean, they had the horse player show, which was also a big introduction for me into horse playing. And then I know like Pete Fornatel tried to kind of create a show around a tournament, and I don't know if there was success at all there, but I've always wondered like why tournaments haven't become more popular. I mean, now you got Dave Portnoy playing in these tournaments and the Barstool guys, and you know, I always feel like there's opportunity there to maybe grow the sport. But I feel like there's got to be reasons why that hasn't been taken advantage of. But I feel like my demographic, like 25 to 40-year-old, those guys like love the idea of playing in a tournament and making big bets and risking. And I don't really not. I'm sure somebody has the answer. It's just not me. I don't know why that tournaments aren't more popular than they are.
Well, keep in mind the back drop of racing in general has the handle's been declining pretty significantly.
Yeah. Oh
So
yeah.
against that background, there actually has been some growth in the tournaments. Every year they get a little bigger. I certainly could grow faster, I think, but it is one area where it actually has grown in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of swimming upstream a little bit in terms of racing overall. That might hold it back a little bit, but that could be a whole different conversation. What could help improve, get more players engaged in racing in general and in contests specifically.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a question for you. I haven't asked this before because I haven't had a computer player on, but we probably have some listeners who are you know building models or thinking about it, or they're sports bettors that are dabbling in racing, kind of where you were. What advice would you give them specifically on how to be successful, both you know on the computer modeling part, but just in the, betting on races in general, what kind of skills and things should they work on? How should they approach it?
Yeah, so I said this earlier, just that like when I first started building models, I took a all right, I'm gonna build a model so I could bet every single race and collect as much rebate as I can because I think I can have an edge. And like I think if you're looking to build if you're looking to get into modeling now with horse racing, I would try to take more of a sniper approach, uh, where maybe be like I said earlier, be segmented. Create a niche, or not create a niche, but focus on a niche of racing that maybe interests you, or you think that there's potential opportunity for, and focus on that and do that for a year and see, and kind of see what happens. Maybe a year's too long. I don't know, but my point is that I wish when I started this, and I started modeling horses probably 6 7 years ago for the first time. I wish I started on a smaller scale of focusing on a particular niche. Whether it be a track, a type of race, uh, you know, maybe Hong Kong, like I was saying. But start small rather than large, and use that as an opportunity to um, learn along the way about maybe some of the things that I've spoken about today, or just some of the things that you would learn on your own. But I always kind of feel like I did it the wrong way, where I don't have, a data science background academically. I didn't really use it in my career, so I kind of overwhelmed myself, I think, by trying to make a one size fits all kind of approach, and I don't that wasn't good for me. So kind of develop an expertise on your own and start there. Do that for some time and see how that works, learn from it, and then slowly scale up from there.
So walk before you run.
Yeah.
Try to keep it more focused early on, maybe where your interest or strength is. Try to gain some success and confidence there, and then you can gradually expand the scope.
Yeah, I think so. And, one of the other things that I think goes along with this is that if you have some sort of domain knowledge, or, subject matter expertise, like when it comes to horse racing or sports or whatever, I think there's pros and cons to doing that. Like, let's just say that one of your listeners has been a lifelong Naira uh, better and wants to build a model now. And he learns that Arad Ortiz Jr. is overbet, okay, which is probably common knowledge, but that he's overbet, but he knows he's a really good jockey. So like, he's got certain biases there. So that's one of the cons of like, having some domain knowledge over one of your niches. The pro is that, you have knowledge that you can add context to certain things, and have an understanding. But I would try to remove all biases as much as possible if you were going to do that. So, I think that's just kind of part two of kind of what I'm saying. Develop a niche. If you have some expertise with something, just remove biases, and use that expertise accordingly.
Well, if you approach the modeling part correctly, I would think it will take care of the biases, right? If you follow the data.
Well, if you follow the data, but there's plenty of I don't. Some people might think that there's something wrong with the model, or I think like I think like there's just a different way to interpret things. And if you have a bias and you're stubborn about it, then you won't be following that data. So I think it's important to just go into things with open uh open what am I trying to say? Just have an open mind, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think that's good that's good advice even for the
Yeah,
non-computer players.
yeah,
So
yeah.
they're
It goes,
using a
it
men
goes, yeah, it goes hand in hand. Is what I was gonna say. It's just like you're asking me model specific questions, but they kind of apply to any sort of approach to formulating an opinion. So
yeah, which gets to the point I made earlier that everybody uses a model if they
yeah,
have a process. It's just whether it's a mental model or a computer model, but it's still a model, and you can have biases and all those sorts of things come into play. Um, so he- here's a question for you. I mean, sort of the trend over time has been a lot of the retail bettors are leaving or, l- or at least betting less than they used to because somewhat because of pricing, but because of increased competition. And that increased competition's a lot of it's the teams or young sharp players like you using betting models or the older sharp players that are still in there because they're sharp. Bottom line is that it gets harder and harder to find those edges. So do you, even with a rebate, it becomes harder and harder to make a long-term profit. So how do you see that playing over time? You're younger, you're trying to make a living at this. Are you pretty optimistic that you're going to be able to keep finding edges? Are you just uncertain? And I'm curious as to what you think long term, how this kind of pari-mutuel world will evolve.
I don't know if optimistic would be the right word. I feel cautiously confident, if that's even a thing, that I will continue to adapt, evolve, and continue to find edges. Um, but I would say, horse racing is my focus right now. But I think I've said this a few times, and I've definitely said it on Twitter. Like I've added more sports betting into my handle because of the potential edges that exist there, and that definitely helps. And I think like longer term, I mean, not to put down horse racing, but yeah, like there's going to be better edges, and that's in that side of the aisle. That doesn't mean that there's going to be zero edges in horse racing, but yeah, as you said, like the market's going to continue to get more efficient over time. But I don't know if I would say it's ever going to be impossible to do. Again, like you have even the teams, like they compete with each other, which I think people forget about because they just view the teams as us versus them kind of thing. But they compete with each other, and that doesn't mean they're on the same exact horses every single time. I mean, we're not even sure if every single computer team actually wins. Like, obviously, they get great rebate. I'm sure they have a lot of smart people, but that doesn't mean that that they're printing money. I mean, they have. I think a lot of other people forget is they have a lot of expenses themselves to even exist. And I'm not defending them at all. Don't get me wrong, but uh, I guess what I'm saying is that like you know I think in the short term, medium term, I feel confident or cautiously confident that I will be able to grind out horse racing, unless there's a seismic shift. I mean, it doesn't help that handle goes down. I think it just furthers my point about finding a niche, become an expert in that, maximize it as much as possible, and then move on to the next thing. That's kind of what I was alluding to earlier when I'm saying review your results, know what you're good at, know what you're okay at, know what you should probably not be betting on, and maximize what you can. Um, one thing I'd say is that once I figured out that I was much worse at maidens versus non-maidens is well, guess what? I'm going to bet more on non-maiden races and less on maiden races, and that also helps maintaining your or maximizing your ROI. So it's a very difficult question to answer. I think with any sort of certainty of will the edges continue to exist in horse racing? But, I think it just, I don't think the blanket approaches of trying to play every single race, or like, just the races where, you might not have an edge, like you're not sure if you have an edge. Like those are probably races you shouldn't play at all. Like have a expertise, have a niche, have the results to back it up and fire away. But, the pools will get more efficient over time, as you alluded to, with more smart people. And, will it ever be computer versus computer? Uh, maybe, maybe not. I don't think in the next 5, 10 years it'll be that way, but that's just my opinion, of course. And um, try to know what you're good at and know what you're not good at, and try to maximize it from there. I think that's just very important, and it's something that I think about on an everyday basis.
Yeah, somewhat tongue in cheek, I say the end game is computers betting against computers on virtual races. So,
Yeah.
we won't need any people. Even we don't even need any horse players. So people say without horse players you couldn't have the game. Well, that may not be true. You may not need trainers or jockeys or horses even.
Yeah, I can see that.
All right. So before I get to, well, I'll ask this question first. I always ask the magic wand question. If you could do one thing to change the game to make it better, if you could just wave your magic wand, what would you change? Try to make things better.
Well, the obvious thing, and I think it's been talked about before on here, but uh, I've done tests to basically say that if takeout were to be reduced, I know my personal handle goes up exponentially. So, yes, takeout is too high in general. I think the one argument to that is price sensitivity. When you're talking about adding new customers, or trying to draw new customers, I don't think the masses are very price sensitive. I mean, if you look across the aisle to sports betting, the masses are playing, mostly same game parlays, which frankly have a similar hold to horse racing. So, you know, while an informed sports bettor isn't playing those same game parlays, and maybe they could come across the aisle to horse racing if the pricing was more competitive. Like, I don't think the masses are gonna, join horse racing anytime soon. I don't think anybody's saying that. So, the first answer would be takeout. I would say needs to be reduced, but I don't. I think it's basically to preserve the current customer and increase the churn. And I by no means am I an expert at the economics of horse racing. I have my little niche of building models and understanding markets and making a decent living at it. But um, I would say the potential for me to make more money is there if takeout is reduced. And I don't think anyone's arguing that take. I've never seen someone say, takeout needs to be higher, except your guys at Kentucky Downs. I know you've been vocal about that. But
Boycott Kentucky Downs.
So yeah, and like the second thing, I've seen this argument before, and I wholeheartedly agree with it. You've got a data issue with horse racing where a casual player comes into horse racing and they don't understand, I think, why they have to pay for data. And there's free sources out there, but if you really want like good enough data, you pay for it. And I used to think this was like, one of the edges of horse racing was like, if you want the best data, you pay for it and you have a step up on everybody else. And, there might be some validity there, but also you've got again this demographic that's 25 to 40 that's like obsessed with crunching data when it comes to sports betting. And I feel like with lower takeout and more freely accessible data, you and the tournament thesis that I talked about earlier, like I feel like you make this sport way more similar to sports betting, and maybe even better than sports betting. And maybe I'll get blasted for saying that, but I'm just saying that I think the demographics is there to attract more younger people to horse racing. Will it play out? Probably not, but I think it's there. Um, but I think it starts with data. Obviously, pricing is just not competitive at all with other gambling alternatives. And for me, those are the two big things that if they don't change, then yeah, I think it's going to continue to downtrend. And I don't think anyone's debating that.
So you feel pretty strongly that if it was priced better and data was available, at least free or a lot cheaper, but ideally lots of data free, maybe more of the competitive kind of tournament aspects. If those were in play, you think it could attract and hold that younger demographic that's so elusive for horse racing?
I mean, I think you're giving it a chance to do that. I don't know if there's a certainty that it would. I just know based off of, my timeline and Twitter, my friends, what their what types of gambling they like, then yeah, I think that gives it the best shot. But I don't ever see that actually happening, unless things get too desperate. But the feeling is right now that handle is dropping. The CAW handle is going up, and that's kind of keeping horse racing afloat right now. So eventually, you would think there's going to be a breaking point to some extent. But I don't know. I don't have an answer. This is just my opinion and my observations of what I see, and being a 37-year-old man who likes to gamble and having similar friends like that, and what I think it would take to attract, that type of demographic. So
Yeah, I totally agree that that demographic is the kind of demographic that you could attract and hold, and that just naturally could be drawn to this game because there's so much about it that would be attractive. But it's definitely not the demographic that gets targeted.
no,
It's a hip go for a day and dress up, and that's just not going to get people engaged at a level that's going to make a difference in terms of growth of the sport.
yeah, I see it on the other side, on the sports betting side, that this demographic exists, that they're number driven. They like the intellectual, challenge of coming up with supposed good bets in sports betting, and they exist, and it's arguably even more of an intellectual challenge on the horse racing side. Obviously, the pricing is off, and there's no data available freely. So, you know, if you put yourself in a position to attract that it might happen. It may happen. That's all I'm saying. But definitely not a certainty. But because I think sports bettors are typically, we'll back up. Like if you look at horse racing, horse players, most of them grew up with it. Like I feel like I listen to that all the time on a podcast. Their dad took them to the track, whatever. And it kind of works the same way with sports betting, where people get into sports betting because they're just fans of certain teams, and they end up liking a sport and follow it. So, I'm saying this on one side of my mouth, but uh, I'm not sure if the draw of horse racing exists for the 25 to 40-year-olds just because they're not fans of the game. Now, maybe they can become fans of the games because of everything I've said, but I'm just not sure the industry would ever try to do that. And even if they did, would it actually happen? I think there would be some uh, transition over, but I don't know. That's just my opinion.
So you're not sure what if it would work, but you know what currently we have is probably not going to attract them.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Anything else that we haven't touched on that you would want to share with the listeners?
Um. No, I think I've said. I think I've said it all.
Okay. Well, what I like to end on a high note. So, and maybe with the computer play, well, although I'll be curious to see what kind of answer you have. But the memorable score, I like to have like it doesn't have to be your biggest score or anything, but just one that really it was memorable that sticks out in your mind that you look back on fondly, in the past. You maybe share that with the listeners.
Yeah, I think like what got me um like sustained focus on horse racing was my first. I'd said this earlier, but my first win at Del Mar in the tournament, where I was actually at the track and in the room. I kind of said earlier that I just like always been naturally drawn in those tournament type rooms, and uh, I just remember it was the last race of the contest. I had like $7,000 bankroll. I remember it was a 5-to-1 horse in a turf route, and I don't know if you've been to Del Mar, but I was like basically standing at the top of the stretch or close to the top of the stretch, and I saw my horse uh, punch through a hole, I believe, coming around the turn there at the final turn, and just poke through and start to draw away, and I just couldn't believe that I put $7,000 on a horse to win, and it actually won, and I ended up winning. But before they announced the winners, I was like, oh, someone else had to have done that. Like someone else had to have went all in on that horse, and I probably finished like third or something. And like I think that I ended up with 42,000. Someone had like 29 or something like that, and I just couldn't believe it. And it kind of hooked me as like, wow, I can actually do this. And I always think back to that day, and I was with some friends there, and we were just kind of going crazy. And that's what makes the game great. The highs are the highs, and they keep you coming back.
That's a great story. Do you remember the horse?
His name was
Number 7, right?
no, I don't remember the number. I think it might have been the 2 horse. I feel like he had the white saddle, but saddlecloth. But I can't remember the name. I know that the trainer was Jeff Mullins. The jockey was Tyler Bays. I remember that. And it was like Maven Creek or Raven Creek or something. I don't know, but I'll just never forget that feeling. I didn't even see him cross the finish line. I just knew he had it at the top of the turn, and watching that was like in slow motion, punch through the hole there, and yeah, that was. Ever since then, I've been trying to play this game extremely seriously. So that's kind of what propelled me to where I am today.
Yeah, it's always nice to have a score, but it's a contest setting where you win a contest. I mean, for those people who grew up competitively like I did, especially playing sports, it's a little sweeter, a little more fun than just betting on it, or especially having your computer bet on it and ka-ching, that's exciting, but be there with your friends and win a contest. It just takes it to a whole new level. So, I that's a great example, great story. And for those of you who haven't played in contests, uh, there's a whole nother dimension. We talked about the game theory, we talked about the competitiveness, even the social aspect, the camaraderie you get among the players, the friendships you make. There's a lot of pluses to getting involved in contests. So I'm kind of a shameless shill for contests, have been for a long time. Um, but that your example there is just a great example of how it makes it a little more special. If you had done that just on a bet at home on an ADW or through your computer model, it probably wouldn't be nearly as memorable, I would think.
Definitely, definitely. So yeah, that was obviously before COVID, and then uh, everyone just started playing tournaments online. But I think I've only been to like one tournament live since then, and just talking about the story now wants me to go back to be in that room again and hopefully get another score. So
Well, get there, go to Santa Anita this year at the Breeders' Cup. I mean, you're going to probably play in it anyway. I'll
yeah,
be there. We can
okay,
we can get together and you can meet some of these other players. I've sent, like I said, you can make friends and learn from a lot of other players. So you know, it does. You have to make the trip, but I'll tell you, the Breeders' Cup live is something. It's special, even without the contest. Just seeing all the best, in one place, in
yeah,
a beautiful place like Santa Anita in the fall it's worth the trip. But being in the BCBC even makes it that much more fun. So I really encourage you and anybody else out there. It's a high barrier to entry in terms of the fee for a lot of players, but you can win your way in through smaller contests. In fact, last week I won a seat at the BCBC. So I encourage people to get involved in contests if you haven't, or at least give it a chance. I mean, it's not for everybody, but it's a lot of fun.
yeah, definitely. Congrats on that.
All right, that's about it then. I want to really thank you, Dennis. This has been a lot different than the other Bet with the Best podcast, but I think hopefully it'll provide some insight to the younger players out there in that demographic we talked about that might be interested in developing a model or trying to do that right now. Um, and for the rest of the players who want to know a little bit more about what these guys are doing and how it all works. So thanks again. Really
Yeah, thank you.
appreciate it.
Yeah, this was
Uh,
fun. I had a blast.
yeah, same here. The time flew by. And I want to thank all the listeners again for all the support. And may you boldly go where no horse player has gone before.